I'm Larry Gladney, Associate Dean for Natural Sciences in the School of Arts and Sciences at Penn, and also a professor in physics and astronomy. So I have been a seminar leader for our local Teachers Institute of Philadelphia, and also been contributing some of the ideas for how to get more STEM faculty involved in coming up with seminar ideas, or matching some of the seminar ideas that the teachers come up with to potential roles going into the future, so that we can have offerings that are more regular in terms of STEM fields. And the way I got involved was that even though the Teachers Institute has been around in Philadelphia for now 11 years, it hadn't had, I think, a whole lot of STEM involvement, primarily because the idea of coming up with, I think, a model that works for STEM teachers involves some variation on the sort of standard model that you sort of read about. For example, the typical courses that are offered, seminars that are offered, are only for teachers within a very well-defined set of schools around the university. For STEM, that had to be changed. We opened it up so that essentially teachers from all over the city can join in. We had to find, I think, a way to match what the teachers' ideas of things that would be interesting to do are to the kinds of things that come, I would say, maybe naturally, but that's probably too strong a word, but that would come into vogue for the kinds of things that we feel comfortable doing. A great example is environment and sustainability. We don't really have scientists who are environmental scientists who aren't already involved pretty heavily with things like master's programs and outreach programs that they're already doing. So when we decided to give a seminar in energy, sustainability, environment, I did that. It's not my field of expertise. I had to sort of bone up on things in order to make sure I'd be far enough ahead of the teachers. But I think we're getting to the point now where we're somewhat more flexible in terms of getting faculty at ease with this. I had been involved with outreach for a long time. For several years, directed an institute that actually gave master's degrees to in-service teachers of high school chemistry and middle school science. So I was pretty familiar at working with teachers and being with them in a classroom environment, and also with this idea that they are fully fledged partners in how we create the course, how we arrange it, how we actually go through a seminar from beginning to end. So some of the ways that being involved in the seminars have benefited me as a faculty member are, well, to start with, we are working with teachers as full-fledged partners. And so as a citizen of Philadelphia, now a longtime resident, 30 years there, I'm very interested in what's happening in education in the surrounding areas, West Philadelphia. And it's not that easy to keep up with what's actually going on the ground. I mean, you read very dire stories in the newspapers. We understand the political situation is very charged. But in fact, hearing directly from teachers what the challenges are, I think is relatively important. There's also a professional aspect, which is that every time I'm in a seminar, whether I'm visiting or I'm actually leading one of them, it's the case that I'm surrounded by people who are professional teachers. It's the only situation in which you regularly engage with people who actually know how to teach and can give you real feedback in terms not only of how you're doing it, but better ways in which they approach particular aspects of the challenges that come up with teaching. So that aspect of it is, I think, really interesting, because it's a co-generational dialogue is the way that teachers refer to it, but it really is based around the idea that everybody brings something to the table, so that it's not only shared expertise, but it's the experiences of what's worked and what hasn't, in particular groupings of students who have different issues that they bring into the classroom, who have different approaches in terms of how they learn. And so it's a real way in which we take the theory that we could read about or hear about in say, occasional talks that happen in teaching and learning centers, and really see how it applies to people who've been doing it, actually, in sometimes very challenging environments, but sometimes very rich environments. So there are advantages that can take place in the high school that we wish we could have in a college classroom. And this is a great opportunity to ask, why not? So as a professional, in the sense of a faculty member who teaches and does research, that's a pretty interesting and intriguing aspect of being a part of the seminars. Well, the university certainly benefits by being a good partner with the school district. As you probably know, and it's true for many universities, we get a lot of benefits from the city by virtue of the fact that we're a nonprofit, that we add to the educational achievements of the citizens. But that's not always considered enough by people who are in the city. And in large measure, that's because it is an Ivy League school. And so not a huge number or huge fraction of the students who actually graduate from high schools there wind up going to Penn. So consequently, it's important, I think, for Penn to show that there is grassroots interest. It's not simply something that's determined by administrators from the top as a way of saving face or having good relations with Harrisburg as well as City Hall. This is something that is generated as an activity that the faculty and the students who are engaged in various aspects of this have to be wedded to. You couldn't order it from the president and provost, nor could you actually pay faculty enough to be able to spend time putting in the kinds of effort that goes into the seminars. So that is, I think, a relatively profound statement, and it's one that's important for the faculty themselves who are engaged in this to realize that they have something to give back, and there's a way in which we can do it, again, that's very structured, that it makes it possible for them to do without an open-ended commitment, that I think is probably the single most important aspect of the partnership, is that we have faculty who are willing to be in a classroom in which they're equal with the teachers, participants who are engaged in the seminar because of their own interest, right? They're also coming off of work, having taught a full day, and then fighting traffic to get to the university in order to sit there and engage in dialogue with you. And that's just enormously personally gratifying, I think. Well, I think the impact of the seminars on teachers are primarily through the fact that they get to engage in adult discussion. You know, if you are, even with 11th or 12th graders, if you've been in a classroom, you realize that they're very much not adults. The discussions take place and there's learning that happens, but it's sometimes really just terrific to have an out time in which you're discussing really deeply with academic issues or questions that come up as part of what you've been teaching, or you're exploring something that you've not had a chance to ever really engage in. And so it's not that unusual for teachers to come into a subject matter which they didn't have in college, to engage in a seminar in which they're stretching themselves academically and intellectually, and to have it done in a safe environment. And what I mean by that is that they're working with other teachers and with seminar leaders and seminar coordinators who understand that everybody, again, has something to contribute to discussion and part of the learning process. So there's no grades, there's no, I think, credit bearing that goes into this. No one's punching a clock to say how many hours you're putting into this. Of course, all of that is sort of built into the structure, but it's a real time for adults to get together and discuss issues that are pretty deep, pretty meaningful, and they enjoy that. I think for the STEM fields, there's also an extra benefit for the teachers because they get to form partnerships. Unlike, say, English or history or some of the arts, if you are a physics teacher, for example, in a high school in West Philadelphia, you're the only one. There's very little opportunity for you to collaborate with other people who are either teaching science or certainly teaching the discipline that you're teaching. And there are not very many opportunities in which you're doing professional development in which you are co-developing. Normally what happens is you get told a bunch of things about best techniques, but you don't actually get a chance to talk to people who've practiced them. You don't get a chance to work with someone who perhaps has had some very unusual experience. For example, maybe they've gotten a chance to do research the summer before. So you get to hear about these things in a forum where essentially there's just no other way to do that. So for the STEM teachers, I think there's a big benefit of knowing that there's a network that forms around these seminars of people they can talk to, go to, ask about best practices. That is probably unique. I don't know that there's any other aspect of professional development that the school district provides that really gives them that opportunity.